Okay, so welcome back, grade 12s. I hope you guys had a good weekend. It's really brutal to hear, I guess, that we're not going to be back in class until the end of the year. It's really unfortunate just because of how much I really did like this class. But there's nothing we can do about it, so we're just going to try and make, I guess, the best out of what we have left. So we're going to go through metabolism today, and then we have next week is going to be metabolism, but we're going to go into anabolic reactions and specifically photosynthesis. Then we're going to be done metabolism, and then for the rest of the time, we're going to be doing systems. So it's my favorite unit, and we're going to go through like the nervous system, the endocrine system, and we're kind of going to end on that. And then we'll cover actually most parts of the course. So I'll be happy to see that at least you're going to be, I think, as prepared as you possibly could going into next year, because we did get most of the big ideas done. Okay, so today's lesson is going to be over the control of metabolism, so how we can kind of control our metabolism. We're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get into the endocrine unit, because that's really how we do it, is we use hormones to control it. And then metabolic disorders. So metabolic disorders are a very generic term, because metabolism or metabolic disorders really means to any disorder that affects the creation or the reactions in your body. So really a lot of disorders affect the reactions in your body, but specifically kind of cellular respiration is a big one. So if you look kind of under there, you can see things like diabetes, okay, is considered obesity, Tay-Sachs, okay? A lot of different disorders affect our metabolism, okay? So we're going to go through kind of how we control it, and then we're going to kind of talk about disorders. So just to recall, we discussed metabolism last week, and it really kind of refers to all the reactions in your body that create energy, okay? So it's not only the ones that create energy, okay, and those are the ones we normally think of metabolism, but it's also all the reactions that require energy. So we call these two different types. Catabolic is the ones that release energy, and when you do release energy, you're going to go from a complex molecule to a simple molecule. And then the other one that we have are the anabolic reactions. Okay? And they kind of link together. They sometimes say that they're coupled reactions. And what they mean by coupled reactions is that the energy released from catabolic reactions is used to power the anabolic reactions. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that when we talk about ATP or energy, you only make ATP if you require it. We don't make surpluses of it and then store it. So you only make it if you need it. And how you know if you need it is you perform anabolic reactions. So if you need to perform an anabolic reaction is when your body basically tells itself it needs to start doing catabolic reactions in order to power them. Okay, so just to keep in mind, you're not just constantly making ATP. You only make as much as you need. Okay? So the focus last week was really on catabolic reactions, and we really kind of went through two things. The first thing that we went through was the good catabolic reaction of aerobic cellular respiration, and that's the one that we normally do. That's where we take our macromolecule. We mostly talked about glucose, but again, you can burn fats and occasionally proteins and nucleic acids, but mostly it's just going to be fats and carbohydrates. Okay? You take those things, you combine them with oxygen, okay? And when we do, we get carbon dioxide, water, and we get a lot of ATP. Okay, last week we really didn't talk about much, we just said a lot. Basically, one glucose molecule gives you 38 ATPs if you burn it this way. Okay, if you go through and you use oxygen, you're going to get 38 ATPs. Okay, and that's kind of a rating scale of how much energy you're going to get out. Now, the other process that we talked about last week is the undesirable one, at least from a human perspective, is anaerobic cellular respiration. And that's when you don't have enough oxygen. Okay, it's when your cells in your body are lacking oxygen, but they still try and burn glucose. So you still burn it. Okay, so you still burn glucose, but with the absence of oxygen, you still get carbon dioxide. That's the same. But in humans, what we get is we get lactic acid, this nasty byproduct, and that's the burning sensation that we feel. Okay? Now, other species don't make lactic acid. They actually make ethanol, like yeast. Okay, so when yeast don't have enough oxygen, they actually make ethanol, but they both make nasty byproducts. These are toxins to our body. So it's mostly a bad process. Now, the big thing here is look how much ATP you make. You still make a little bit of energy, but nowhere close to the 38 that you would make if you burned it with oxygen. So if I take one glucose molecule and I burn it with oxygen, I'm going to get tons of energy, 38 ATP. If I take another glucose molecule and try and burn it without oxygen, I only get 2. Okay? And that's why we can't support ourselves on anaerobic cellular respiration. Okay? If we don't breathe in oxygen, we're going to die because 2 ATP is not enough to keep us alive. Okay? We need to have around 38 ATP. Okay, so I just kind of want to go through really that process, because aerobic cellular respiration is a very, very important process. I mean, we're going to talk about it throughout this lesson, but it's a very, very important process. So really, again, I just kind of want to go through it. So when we say glucose, we're really kind of just saying food, okay? Because you're going to eat proteins and you're going to eat carbohydrates, and they're not all going to be glucose. So we're going to say food. And what that is, that's chemical energy. It's energy that's stored. It's not usable energy. Our body can't use it. It's just stored energy, okay? So we take food in, then we breathe in oxygen, okay? And we only breathe in as much oxygen as we need, okay? If we are burning a lot of food, we breathe in oxygen a lot more rapidly. And that's when your breathing starts increasing and your heart starts pumping faster, okay? But notice you don't sustain that, okay? If you are not burning food or burning macromolecules, you don't bring in as much oxygen, okay? Because you basically want to slow this process down. We don't always want it to be going full speed. Because after we combine these two things and we react them, we get usable energy, and that's ATP, okay? The full name is adenosine triphosphate. That's the molecule of it, okay? It's actually got the same adenosine from DNA, okay? That's the root of it, and it's just got 3 phosphates attached to it. So when we talk about kind of our metabolism or our metabolic rate, it's really kind of looking at, well, how fast can I make energy? How much chemical energy do I have in my body? So how much food do I have, or stored food? Okay, and we can store that as fat in our body. And then really kind of what comes down to your fitness levels is really not how much food you have in your body. It is important that you're eating proper foods, but between someone who's really, really fit and someone who's not fit is really this, is how much oxygen and how fast can they bring it into their cells. Someone who's a natural athlete is able to do this at a lot faster rate than a person who is not athletic. They were just born naturally talented, and what that talent in athletic ability is, a lot of it comes down to is the fact that you can just bring oxygen more rapidly than somebody else. So you can keep this reaction going, you're not going to fatigue, you're going to be more alert, you have more energy. Okay, so aerobic cellular respiration, we're just going to kind of talk about food for a little bit of a second. We're going to kind of bring in calories. So during aerobic cellular respiration, we're taking food and we're burning it with oxygen to make ATP. Okay. Well, how much ATP can I get out of my food? Okay. Like if I eat a banana or if I eat a peach, which one's going to give me more ATP? Well, we don't actually rate our food with ATP. Okay. We don't label the food with, oh, this banana contains this much ATP, but rather another unit called calories. Now, calories is really kind of a relating scale to ATP. It's just the general public doesn't really use ATP for how much energy is in food. We put it in as a calorie. So a calorie is used to indicate basically how much ATP that specific food can provide you. Now, it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. If you have 1 calorie, it's not 1 to ATP, but there is a conversion. Okay? So when foods have different amounts of calories, and you just kind of look across my picture here, okay, basically that's saying that this avocado down here can give you a lot more ATP than something like this orange. Okay? They basically kind of, the calorie is a rating scale of how much ATP you can get. Okay? So there's a big slide here. This is basically pictured of 200 calories from different foods. So if you look across here, this is 200 calories, that's 200 calories, that's 200 calories, that's 200 calories. Now, they provide different levels of ATP. Okay, you can see that in order to get 200 calories or that much ATP, look how much celery you have to eat. You have to eat a ridiculous amount, okay? And the reason for that is that we don't burn celery very well. Okay? Other foods that we hardly have to eat anything, if you look down here, say in the bottom right, we look down here at butter, look how much butter you need to eat, only 28 grams. Okay? This is actually 1.5 kilograms of celery, so that would mean that I converted it over here. You would have to eat 3 pounds of celery just to get 200 calories, just to get that much energy out of celery. If you eat celery exclusively, you're going to be a very tired person, because again, you're going to have to eat 3 pounds of it to get 200 calories. Okay? Now, if you ate a little thing of butter, a very, very small amount of butter over here, you would only have to eat that amount in order to get that 200 calories. Now, I'm not promoting eating butter over calories. This is not the kind of the route that I'm going over. You have to eat a balanced diet. I'm just kind of showing you the different amounts of energy that we get. So why? Why can't we get very much energy out of celery? Well, it kind of relates back to our first unit. Okay? Because most of celery is the actual structure. We're not actually eating the fruits or vegetables or the flower of celery. We're actually eating its body. And the body of plants is made out of a polysaccharide, if you remember from Unit 1, called cellulose. Okay? Well, we can't digest cellulose. Okay? So it goes in us and leaves us in almost the exact same weight. So if you eat, say, 3 pounds of celery, you're going to excrete almost 3 pounds of fiber because almost all of celery is fiber because we can't process that cellulose. And that's why, because we can't process that cellulose, we can't turn cellulose into ATP, although there's a lot of material there, most of it is indigestible or fiber. So we can't get any ATP from it. Okay, now we do get a little bit of ATP from each celery stalk, but we get very little. We have to eat a lot of them in order to get those 200 calories. So only a small amount of celery is capable of entering cellular respiration cycle and producing ATP. Okay? So we can't, get a lot of kind of basically energy out of mostly fruits and vegetables. Okay? Now, when we go from foods from animals, it's almost completely digestible. Okay? We have very, very little fiber out of animals. If you eat a steak, there's basically no fiber in that. Okay? You're going to be able to digest all of it because you're eating an animal. The animal already got rid of all the fiber for you. Okay? So it's a higher calories per size. Okay? So things like meat, butter, and milk, they're going to have a lot of calories per unit in comparison to fruits and vegetables. Now, in order to maintain a proper weight, you need to be eating a lot of fruits and vegetables because it fills you up, but it doesn't give you the surplus of energy, and then those go into stored as fat. Okay. All right, so when we look at average number of calories per day, okay, and this is kind of just a different age. So as we age, we get a different number of calories per day that we're supposed to eat. There's differences between females and males. There's differences between like what kind of lifestyle you're living. So when they look at the average calorie per day, what they're basically saying is this indicates how much ATP the average person requires each day to power all their anabolic reactions. Okay, how much ATP they're going to need in order to replicate any cells they need to replicate, to fix any damage, to build any DNA, to build a protein. Okay, how much ATP does the average person need in a day? Okay, now remember that catabolic reactions release energy to power the anabolic reactions. Okay, and that's what calories are. It's basically a rating scale of how many catabolic reactions you're going to be able to use in order to power those metabolic. Okay, so when we look at our metabolic rate, okay, and that's going to be kind of the focus today. Although metabolism refers to all the reactions that both create energy, the catabolic, and those reactions that require energy, anabolic, metabolic rate is often calculated by just your rate of cellular respiration. Okay? Now, or just your catabolic rate. And the reason for that is, like I mentioned before, you only make energy if you need it. Therefore, catabolic reactions only run if they're required by anabolic reactions. So therefore, by measuring catabolic reactions, the rate of cellular respiration can really be a measure of metabolism because you're only going to turn on your catabolic reactions when you need it. It's required by your anabolic reaction. Okay, so our metabolic rate. So if you kind of look over a picture here I have on the right, this guy's getting his metabolic rate determined. Okay? Because when we look at our metabolic rate and we're trying to figure out, well, what rate is your metabolism running? Okay, we have to think of, well, what is the catabolic reaction? It's right down here. It's glucose plus oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, and energy. But it's very, very difficult in a lab scenario to determine, well, how fast are they burning carbohydrates, or maybe they burned a protein, maybe they burned a polysaccharide. It's very difficult to measure that, okay? Because you'd have to be kind of like figuring out how much glucose is in their blood at all times, and then how much should that drop. It's a very, very hard measurement. So instead of doing that, in order to measure how fast you're performing cellular respiration, they often measure your oxygen consumptions. So what they'll do is they'll hook up a mask to you and just kind of look at basically the rate that you are absorbing oxygen into your bloodstream. Okay? Now, another way they can look at it is, that's one way, is looking at oxygen. The other way is by looking at CO2. They'll sometimes just measure, well, how much CO2 are you producing? And it's really one of those two that they use to calculate your metabolic rate. So this mask that this guy's wearing would be either measuring a couple things. They could be supplying him with oxygen and then measuring how much oxygen he's consuming, or they could be measuring how much carbon dioxide he's breathing out. Okay? Because metabolic rate is the amount of energy expended by an animal over a specific time period called metabolic rate. Metabolic rate can be measured in joules, calories, kilocalories per unit of time. You can also see metabolic rate given as oxygen consumed, like I mentioned there, or carbon dioxide produced. Okay? And if they're going to give it to you in like calories or joules, they're just basically measured the oxygen and carbon dioxide and converted it back to a different rate. Okay, so metabolic rates are not fixed, okay? They change. So throughout the day and over time, as a person ages, metabolic rates change. Now, when we talk about metabolic rate, we're often referring to what we say basal metabolic rate. And it refers to the rate of cellular respiration while a person is awake but at rest. And it's not a very good indicator of your fitness level. You can't really look at your basal metabolic rate and say, okay, I'm fit or I'm not fit, because it's very complicated when you look at your basal metabolic rate. If you want to know how fit you are, you really kind of have to look at the difference between your basal metabolic rate and then your rate after exercise. And if you want to know more about this, Mr. Pugh would be happy to explain that. Now, before we get into that, we're just going to talk about different animals have different metabolic rates. So basically, the larger the animal, usually the higher or the slower their metabolic rate. So if you're a very, very small animal, you usually have a shorter lifespan, and usually your metabolism runs very, very fast. So you eat a lot, you breathe really fast, your heart rate runs really, really quickly. So things like mice, okay? So a couple mice there, they have really, really fast metabolism. But as we get a little bit bigger, we get into a squirrel, metabolism slows down, rat, cat, dog, sheep, human, and then a really, really slow metabolism is an elephant. Okay. Now, if you have a slow metabolism, it means you grow very, very slow. So if you look at like how long it takes for, say, a human in order to become reproductive, that's puberty, it's about 13 years, where a harvest mouse could become reproductive after a month or a month and a half. So they become juveniles after a month and a half, where we become juveniles after 13 years. And a lot of that comes down to our metabolism. They have a very, very fast metabolic rate. They grow really fast. They age really fast, but they die early. We are a little bit slower, where we grow slower, our metabolism's slower, but we live longer. Okay, now what about between people? So people also vary in their basal metabolic rate. Okay, so a high basal metabolic rate means you're performing cellular respiration more often in your cells than someone who has a lower metabolic rate. Okay, so often if you have a high basal metabolic rate, it means that you're performing cellular respiration a lot more often than somebody else, and usually your body temperature is a little bit higher. So if you want to check this, and you can kind of look at and say, oh, my body temperature runs at 36.7, and somebody else is 36.4. Well, if your body temperature is always 36.7, that means that you're burning and keeping your body temperature 0.3 degrees Celsius higher than somebody else. And you'll often be a little bit thinner. So people who are naturally thin often have high basal body temperatures in comparison to someone who's usually, say, a little bit more heavy set naturally. They usually have lower basal body temperatures. This is not the case in every scenario. It's just a pattern that they have seen. Okay, so when they want to figure out your basal metabolic rate, they do it during rest. Okay? Now, you inherited your natural metabolic rate from your mother during development. So basically, your mom kind of imprinted on you during development how fast you should perform cellular respiration when you are resting. Okay? And you're often very, very similar to your mom's body temperature. Okay? Your dad's body temperature can be a little bit different, but often between a mother and their children are very, very similar. Okay? Now, you can alter this resting metabolic rate by proper diet and by exercise. So you can change your basal metabolic rate, but you do have a natural that you were born with. Okay, so now during the day, your metabolic rate also changes, the rate that we perform cellular respiration. Because again, it's just macromolecule plus oxygen leads to CO2 and ATP. So things that increase your metabolic rate, if you're going to crank this up, this reaction, okay, so say it's going slow, but now you're going to crank it up. One thing that you'll do is by eating a meal. Okay, eating a meal activates a whole bunch of things in your stomach. Now your stomach becomes active, so it needs energy. Your small intestines are going to become active. It needs energy. Your throat, your mouth, the chewing mechanism. You're actually, although it sounds weird, you're actually somewhat exercising when you're eating. When you exercise, you need energy. So when we start eating a meal, it increases our metabolic rate. Okay, obviously exercise does. Okay? If you're going to need a whole bunch of ATP for all those muscle contractions, so it increases your metabolic rate. You start increasing this reaction. Thinking. Okay? So this is some things that people forget, but if you've ever, say, been studying and you get exhausted off of it, and you're like, I can't believe I'm exhausted, I've done nothing but sit here. Again, your brain requires ATP to think. So as you think or as you are studying, you're actually increasing cellular respiration in your brain cells. And that's why you can become exhausted simply by studying or by overthinking. And that's why you need to take breaks when you're studying, and you need to refuel. And they often say to eat while you're studying, like small meals, because you are burning actually a lot of calories when you eat. Okay? Growing and repairing. So metabolic rate really picks up when you're doing rapid growing and repairing. Just to give you a kind of a quick an example. So as most of you know, I've had a recent son, and he is just about a year now. And last night for dinner, he was able to eat an entire piece of pizza. Okay, now he only weighs 20 pounds, but he ate an entire piece of pizza because his metabolic rate is extremely high right now, way higher than myself. Now I weigh about 180 pounds. So that's 9 times his amount. So if I put that in relationship, that would be the equivalent of me eating 9 pieces of pizza, which I would not be able to do at this point. Okay, when I was at 16 or 17, I could, but not at my rate right now. Because his metabolic rate is extremely fast right now because he's growing and repairing. He's building bone cells. He's building neurons. He's building muscle cells. He's building all kinds of different tendons and ligaments. Whereas myself, I'm already past that point. So my metabolic rate is way slower because I'm not growing and repairing as much as he is at this point. Okay. You also increase your metabolic rate, anything that requires an anabolic reaction. Okay, if you need to replicate cells, if you need to copy your DNA, if you need to build protein, all of those things are going to require your metabolic rate to be picked up because it's going to require ATP. And then warming the blood. Okay, so in order to keep you warm, you need to keep this metabolism going. So if you are cold, if you walk outside and without a coat on and it's a little bit chilly, your cellular respiration will pick up. You'll notice that your heart rate starts increasing. You'll notice that you'll start burning calories in order to warm up your blood. So one of the interesting things I heard in university is one way to say if you are interested in, say, losing a little bit of weight, one of the ways you can do that is by slightly cooling your house, by turning the temperature of your house down by a degree, but not altering by wearing any more clothing. Then what you will do is you'll be slightly chill at all moments, but you'll be burning calories at all times. Okay, now, that's not to bring your house down so it's freezing. That's not the point. It's just a slight decrease in temperature can help you burn calories. Now, during this increased metabolic rate, you are required to both bring in more oxygen, and that's why your breathing rate increases. Any of these things is going to start increasing your breathing rate, as well as your heart rate. And both of those things are going to bring in oxygen to your cells more rapidly because you need to perform this reaction. Now, you're also during turning food into energy or burning calories, producing lots of energy that must be used. And again, we only burn calories when we need it. So the picture kind of that we have over here is when you increase your metabolic rate, that's when insulin gets activated. And insulin basically starts pulling glucose out of your bloodstream and into your cells because only your cells can perform cellular respiration, not your bloodstream. So that's when insulin becomes active, okay, when you increase your metabolic rate. So any of these things right here can really affect diabetic patients because they require glucose to be going into their cells and they don't have insulin to help them. Okay, things that slow metabolic rate. Now, we don't want our metabolic rate running high at all times. Now, you may think that, but you don't because you don't want to be constantly burning energy. Otherwise, you're going to be exhausted. There has to be times that you slow your metabolic rate down. And we do that by resting. It's very important to rest. If you don't rest, you'll actually die. Lack of sleep. If you completely stop sleeping, we don't know why yet, but you actually die. Okay? So you need to have rest, and it's very important activity. Inactivity also slows your metabolic rate. Being warm or clothing and blankets, and I'll talk about that in a second, okay, that slows our metabolic rate. And then sleeping. Sleeping is kind of the key thing where we really get our metabolic rate down. Hibernation, so that's kind of like a really deep sleep, is when we really slow down our metabolic rate. And that's how animals are able to survive, 4 months without eating, is they really get their metabolic rate down. Now, when your metabolism is running high, you are producing lots of energy and you are alert, okay? But the body also needs time to rest. You need to relax at some points, okay? Otherwise, you're going to be a really strung out person. You're going to be really stressed. When your metabolism is running high, it also produces higher levels of stress. Now, during rest, we slow our metabolism to allow us to perform minimal reactions and essentially sleep. Now, this is why we prefer to sleep with blankets when normally we don't have them. If you've ever thought about why do we we normally are not walking around with blankets on us. But when we go to sleep, almost everybody sleeps with blankets on top of them. Well, why? Why do we do that? Well, the reason for it is when you put that blanket on you, now you don't have to produce as much heat anymore. So you can slow down this reaction because a lot of the cellular respiration reaction is producing heat in your body. So if you can slow this reaction down, okay, you become even more relaxed and you get a better sleep because you're producing no energy at all. Okay, your metabolism is really, really slow and you get this really, really nice deep sleep. So blankets help us sleep more soundly as it allows us to slow our metabolism down even more. Sorry for the typos. You'll see them throughout these just because, anyways. Okay, so this is also why people often like sitting in the sun, okay? If you also have ever like roasting in the sun, like just sitting there and just roasting, and you see animals do this as well. And why they like doing it? Because it allows them to turn off cellular respiration. So it allows them to basically slow down their metabolism. Now, when I say turn it off, it's not ever completely turned off. I mean slow it down. Okay, so it really just kind of, when you are sitting there roasting in your sun, it becomes very relaxing. And the reason for it is because you are not having to run cellular respiration. You're not making all of this ATP energy, and it's not making you alert. It's making you relaxed. Okay, the other thing about metabolic rate changes throughout life. So metabolism changes as we age. We get growth spurts, which causes spike in our basal metabolic rate, so at puberty. So right now, most of you are past that, but when you are in, say, even now, you're kind of in the end of it, you should be able to eat a ton, okay? It's known for kind of teenage boys in particular, and girls, both of them, but in particular the boys, the amount of food that they can consume. And it's during your puberty because you are doing massive growth, okay? Massive increases in muscle strength, your bones are growing, sometimes you're growing taller a lot faster. So your metabolism's picking up in order to do that. Now, it's going to slow down. So if you don't change your eating style, so, if you're eating like 10 pieces of pizza right now, and you do that in your 20s, you are going to be severely overweight because your metabolic rate's going to really, really slow down. So you have to change that. And often that's time you'll see people kind of after high school have huge changes in their weight because their metabolic rate slowed down. Okay? So following puberty, we stop growing horizontally we stopped growing horizontally. I don't know what I was going there. Okay, anyways, we also have other growth spurts, like, when you're a very young child, you're growing rapidly. Age 2, you also get another growth spurt. Now, basically, overall, as you age, your metabolism continuously slows. Now, you can see these little bumps, okay? That's like where puberty, where it stops slowing as much, okay? But it generally, over time, it really, really slows down. And by the time you're an elderly person, your metabolism is running really, really slow at that point. Okay? It's also why elderly people don't need to eat as much as younger people. And if you've noted that in your grandparents, they don't eat very much food, it's because their metabolism is very slow. Okay, so in our next unit, we're going to discuss how our endocrine system, specifically your thyroid gland, controls the increase and decrease in your metabolic rates. It's through this hormone called thyroxine, and it's called T3 and T4, and they basically kind of use that to kind of increase your metabolic rate. It's to tell all your cells that you need to perform cellular respiration faster. So we have really two communication systems in our body. One's the nervous system, and the other one is the endocrine system. And the nervous system can kind of only alert specific cells one at a time. But if you need like all your muscle cells to increase cellular respiration, you need kind of more of a generic message, and we send that as a hormone, kind of a liquid that basically touches all of the cells and tells them all they need to increase their metabolic rate. So we'll talk about that when we get into endocrine. But the last topic we're going to discuss a little bit more, and we're going to talk about it in the learning check tomorrow because I have another STEM case for you. I got a lot of messages back that you guys really liked the STEM cases, so we're going to do another one tomorrow on a metabolic disorder where somebody gets poisoned. It affects their cellular respiration levels. You got to figure out, how they got poisoned. Because recall that all deaths occur solely by stopping cellular respiration in brain cells. That's what clinical death is when your brain cells are not performing cellular respiration anymore. It's also known as not having any brain activity, and that's what clinical death is. It's not when your heart stops. Okay, when your heart stops, that just means that you're not getting any oxygen anymore, and eventually you're going to run out of oxygen, and your brain cells are not going to be able to perform cellular respiration. But your heart stopping is not death. Okay, it's when your brain cells stop performing cellular respiration. Okay? So therefore, any disorder Okay, disease, wound, infection, venom, or poison that kills or harms a person does so by either directly affecting cellular respiration or indirectly. Okay, so there might be a venom out there that affects your respiratory system where it stops your ability of your lungs to breathe. Okay, well, that's not directly affecting cellular respiration, but it's preventing you from bringing in oxygen, and without oxygen, you can't have cellular respiration, so it is indirectly affecting you. Okay, so all venoms and poisons, all indirectly or directly cellular respiration. So before we kind of get into kind of those disorders, and trust me, there's only one slide left. Okay, I know this is kind of a longer lecture, but again, it's because we only have one. I haven't given you the full picture of cellular respiration, and before we go through the kind of disorders, we kind of have to have at least a general idea. We say that it's basically macromolecule or glucose plus oxygen, and it goes into CO2, H2O, and ATP. But it's actually a whole bunch of different steps. Okay, we're starting with glucose. Okay, but glucose then gets converted into this substance, which then gets converted into this substance, which then gets converted into this substance, and then 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 finally into pyruvate. Now, we did talk about the fact that glucose goes into pyruvate, but we didn't mention that you actually have to go through all these other steps in order for that to happen. Okay? And this whole process is called glycolysis, and it's the process of turning glucose into pyruvate. Now, the next thing, we're still not even done yet. We're going to take pyruvate, and we're going to turn it into acetyl-CoA. Okay, and we're going to turn it into acetyl-CoA, and then we're going to run it through what we call the Krebs cycle. So that's just another stage. And again, there's a whole bunch of in-betweens here. If we were in class, we would have gone through this in a little more detail. But now your acetyl-CoA has got to be transformed, and you go through the Krebs cycle, and then after you're done the Krebs cycle, you go through this last one called the electron transport chain, and that's where you make all your energy. So all of these steps before, like glycolysis and then the Krebs cycle and pyruvate oxidation, all of those things really don't make any energy. They kind of make things that go into this last stage called the ETC, or electron transport chain, and that's where you make all of your energy. And you do it by this thing called ATP synthase. Okay? But that's last stage is where you're going to make all your energy. So really, kind of, if you have a poison or a venom that comes in and interrupts any of these stages, so say it cuts it off right here, you're going to interfere, you're not going to be able to form cellular respiration. If it breaks it off right here, if it breaks it off right here, any of these things stops is going to stop cellular respiration, going to stop your ability to make ATP energy, and you're going to essentially begin failing, and then eventually it can cause death. So when we get into this activity tomorrow, it's going to talk about a certain stage that this thing is being. Okay, so just an example of cyanide. Okay, so cyanide is a silent killer. It's very, very difficult to detect as a poison that basically, if you ingest it, it will kill you very shortly, and it's very hard afterwards to determine that it actually was in the body because it breaks down. So it was a very, very popular poison. Now, since then, we've become better at testing, and we can test to see if someone's died of cyanide. But this is the basic idea of how cyanide works, is cyanide basically blocks the ETC. So it blocks the ETC, or also known as oxidative phosphorylation. It blocks this area. So it allows your glucose to turn into pyruvate, pyruvate to turn into acetyl-CoA, and then acetyl-CoA to try and turn into energy, but it never does because basically cyanide goes into your mitochondria and blocks this last stage. So you never get any ATP. And without any ATP, right, it goes in, your brain cells start not having any energy, start shutting down, not be able to perform reactions, and without that, it causes death. Okay? And that toxin is just very specific into the area that it affects. I have a short video that I posted that kind of explains that a little bit more.